Racist cop arrests black woman. Turns out she's state lawyer, ready to expose him. Danielle Johnson was no stranger to prejudice. She had spent much of her life proving wrong those who made unfair assumptions about her. Yet nothing prepared her for the encounter that would change her life forever. Under the fading glow of a flickering street lamp one autumn evening, a routine traffic stop veered sharply into hostility, as a police officer's racist undercurrent simmered just beneath his cold, determined stare. Danielle tried to keep her composure, but when the officer forced her from her car and clapped handcuffs onto her wrists, she realized this was more than a misunderstanding. Little did he know, she was armed with more power than a single set of cuffs could contain. Danielle Johnson had worked her entire adult life to reach a place of dignity and respect. At 36, she was a newly appointed Assistant Attorney General for the state of Illinois, having transferred from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office just months earlier. The weight of the job was heavy, but it was one she welcomed. She had spent years advocating for civil rights cases, specifically tackling police misconduct and systemic racism. Often, she recalled the hope she'd felt upon being accepted into Harvard Law School, a moment that felt like a small victory over decades of prejudice directed at her. Despite that accomplishment, she never forgot how just one encounter could reduce her to nothing in the eyes of someone who refused to see beyond her skin color. It was nearing midnight, and Danielle was finally heading home from a lengthy meeting in Springfield, where she had been poring over case files late into the evening. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, and her fingers drummed unconsciously on the steering wheel as she fiddled with the radio. She inhaled a deep breath, trying to keep herself alert during the 2-hour drive back to Chicago. Every so often, she passed a lone car or a truck hauling cargo through the night. The road was otherwise quiet, just how she liked it, peaceful, away from the constant rush of daytime traffic. A bright halogen glow in her rear-view mirror startled her from her reverie. At first, she thought it might be a driver with overly bright headlights, but then the red and blue lights flicked on a police cruiser. She felt her stomach lurch with a jolt of anxiety. Her speedometer read well below the limit, so she wondered what the reason for the stop could be. Despite the surge of nerves, Danielle had a protocol she followed whenever she was stopped. She had represented enough people in police misconduct cases to know the routine. She slowed her sedan, turned on her hazard lights, and carefully pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. The swirling lights behind her cast an unsettling glow through the rear window. She rolled down her window and waited, already aware that the slightest misstep could turn a mundane stop into a confrontation. Anxiety was a familiar companion in these moments, no matter her degrees, her achievements, or the authority of her badge in the legal realm. She was a black woman alone on a dark road, about to deal with an unknown officer's intentions. Officer Derek Bowers had served in the Illinois State Police for 15 years. He was tall, with a sharp, angular face and eyes that always seemed to be assessing threats. He'd started his career with the Chicago Police Department, but left under a minor cloud, a rumor about planting evidence in a suspect's vehicle. Nothing was proven, and the complaint was eventually dismissed, but the rumor followed him. He rarely spoke of it, and official records bore no mention. He carried his cynicism on his sleeve. The job had twisted his worldview. His approach became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He believed he'd find criminals everywhere. So he did. On that particular night, Bowers had been patrolling a stretch of highway known for smuggling contraband into Chicago. He prided himself on his sixth sense for suspicious behavior. To him, a woman driving alone at that hour was reason enough to investigate. The department had given him leeway for years because he tended to find results. More arrests, more citations, more cases making their way through the system. Little did they realize how many borderline or overtly unlawful stops he made. As Officer Bowers approached Danielle's car, a growing sense of suspicion, fueled by his own bias, colored everything he observed. Danielle's expression, wary yet professional, did not deter him. Instead, he leaned in closer, shining a flashlight into her face. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone stiff, as though he were already convinced she was guilty of something. The smell of cheap coffee lingered on his breath. Danielle, controlling her breath, calmly retrieved her license and registration from her purse and the glove compartment. She kept her hands visible at all times, something she'd been taught to do from a young age as a safety measure. "May I ask, officer, what seems to be the problem?" His lips twisted into a frown. "I'll ask the questions. Now step out of the car." A chill slid down Danielle's spine. This was not standard procedure for a minor traffic stop. Nevertheless, she complied. She opened her door, then stood at the side of the road as cars occasionally whooshed by, stirring the night air. Bowers loomed over her, scanning her license closely by the glow of his flashlight. She caught a glimpse of the name tag pinned to his uniform, Bowers. "And where are you coming from?" he asked curtly. "Springfield." "I had work," she responded, gesturing to the briefcase in her passenger seat brimming with documents. She wasn't sure how much information she should give. "I'm with the Attorney General's office." He took a step closer, ignoring her statement, eyes flicking to the interior of her car. "Working late, huh?" His tone dripped with condescension. "Ma'am, I need to check your vehicle." "Back up." Danielle's brows furrowed. "Am I being detained?" He ignored the question. "Turn around. Place your hands on your head." Alarm bells rang in her mind. She knew her rights. As a lawyer, she was intimately aware that he had given no probable cause, no reason to search her. Yet she also understood there was a precarious power dynamic at play. The entire situation could escalate dangerously if she pushed too hard at the wrong moment. She raised her voice steady, but commanding the respect she deserved. "Officer, I don't consent to a search. There is no basis." Her protest was cut short by his sudden movement. He seized her arm, spun her around, and forced her hands behind her back. Before she fully realized what was happening, cold metal cuffs were locked around her wrists. "Resistance, are we?" he growled. "Let's see how your story holds up at the station." And just like that, the world shifted beneath Danielle's feet. She was no longer the respected Assistant Attorney General working late hours on behalf of justice. She was a frightened suspect, pinned and helpless on the roadside under the glare of a power-hungry officer's flashlight. Officer Bowers shoved Danielle into the back of the cruiser. The overhead radio crackled with chatter reports of a domestic disturbance in a nearby suburb, a broken-down vehicle on the highway. All the while, Danielle's heart thundered in her chest. She tried to focus on breathing, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong, that this officer was stepping beyond the bounds of procedure. Yet fear kept creeping in, each heartbeat echoing the potential for danger. After a 30-minute drive, they arrived at a small local station that served as a satellite office for the Illinois State Police. Its tired fluorescent lights illuminated a chipped counter, an outdated computer, and a stale odor of burnt coffee. An officer behind the desk, whose nameplate read Martinez, raised her eyebrows in surprise. It was unusual for Bowers to bring in a suspect so abruptly, and a professional-looking woman at that. "Caught her speeding or something?" Officer Martinez asked with caution, her gaze darting between Danielle and Bowers. The tension in the air was unmistakable. Suspicious behavior, Bowers snapped. She wouldn't comply with a search. She got mouthy. Could be hiding something. He practically spat the words, as though Danielle's mere existence offended him. Martinez looked at Danielle, noticing her tailored suit jacket and her calm but shocked demeanor. Ma'am, do you have any ID? Danielle cleared her throat and locked her eyes on Martinez. In my purse, which Officer Bowers has. My name is Danielle Johnson, Assistant Attorney General for the state of Illinois. Her voice trembled slightly, still reeling from the aggression she faced. I'd like to speak with someone in command here, or I can call the Attorney General's office directly. For a fleeting moment, Martinez's brow furrowed. Danielle Johnson? As in the Civil Rights Division? Yes, Danielle replied, her voice low but firm. Officer Bowers rolled his eyes, looking unconvinced. We'll see about that. I've dealt with fakes before. He took the ID from the desk where he dropped it. Doesn't mean anything. People produce all kinds of documents. She resisted a lawful search. Danielle tried to stay composed. You never stated a legitimate reason for your search. You detained me without cause. I'd like to call my colleagues. The harsh neon light made every detail stand out. The flicker in Martinez's eyes, the tension in Bowers' posture, the slight flush of indignation creeping up Danielle's neck. It was a surreal experience, a test of everything she knew by heart from the perspective of a legal professional, now living the harrowing truth of the justice system turned against her. Martinez rubbed her temples and tried to remain neutral. Officer Bowers, let's process her properly. Ma'am, once we get you booked, you can make your call. Danielle swallowed back a surge of anger. Booked? She hadn't even been told her charges. The sense of injustice coiled in her stomach. In the back of her mind, she began formulating her next steps, enumerating the legal violations, and preparing to fight back with every ounce of her expertise. Bowers led Danielle down a grim hallway to a small holding room while Martinez worked the computer. The walls were grey cinder block, cold and unwelcoming. Bowers removed the cuffs, albeit roughly, and then glowered at her. You think that badge you carry around in your fancy briefcase makes you untouchable? He sneered. I've seen your kind. You hide behind lawyers and judges, but you're all the same in the end. Danielle's heart pounded. She recognized the venom in his words, the hostility that went beyond just the job. This was personal. I know my rights, she told him, setting her jaw, and I know you've broken them. A twisted smirk curled his lips. We'll see, Miss Big Shot Lawyer. While Bowers strode off to huddle with Martinez, Danielle took the opportunity to request her phone call. She insisted on it, citing her legal right. At first, Bowers refused, but Martinez, mindful of potential repercussions, intervened, persuading him to allow it. Danielle felt a flood of relief when the outdated rotary phone was placed in her hands, even though she was locked in a cramped office, lined with dusty file boxes. Her first call was to her colleague, Assistant Attorney General Mark Orlov. He was someone she trusted, an older, no-nonsense litigator in the Civil Rights Division who'd guided her through her transition to the state office. The phone rang endlessly, each dial tone amplifying her anxiety. Finally, a groggy voice answered. Mark Orlov here. Mark, it's Danielle Johnson, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've been arrested. Detained, really, on false pretenses. I need help. She quickly relayed the essential details, the roadside stop, the forced search, the arrest, the condescending remarks. Orlov's voice sharpened in an instant. Where are you? I'm at a small outpost, about 30 miles outside Springfield on Highway 55, I believe. Officer Derek Bowers is the arresting officer. He's not giving me any reason for the arrest beyond suspicion. Her tone grew more urgent as she spoke. He handcuffed me on the roadside for refusing an unlawful search. A pause. Then Orlov's voice came back, firm and reassuring. Stay calm. I'll get in contact with the Attorney General's office and the Illinois State Police Internal Affairs as soon as possible. This is blatant misconduct. He hesitated a moment. Are you okay? Physically, I mean. Danielle nodded, tears threatening to well up from the tension and exhaustion. I'm fine. Just angry. She took a shaky breath. Thank you, Mark. I know it's late. Don't worry about that, he said. Stay strong. I'll mobilize some people. We'll get you out as soon as we can. When the call ended, Danielle felt a flicker of hope. She was not alone. She had resources, knowledge, and colleagues who respected her. But she also knew the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly, and the next few hours or perhaps days could be a crucible. She felt the weight of every marginalized individual who had ever been subjected to the same powerlessness, who lacked the advantage of a direct line to top legal representatives. The bitterness was overwhelming. She was escorted back to the dim holding room. Through the narrow window in the door, she glimpsed the station corridor, Bowers conferring with Martinez, who looked increasingly apprehensive. Danielle could almost see the scenario forming in Martinez's mind, an arrest that might boomerang on the department, especially if Danielle was indeed who she claimed to be. Bowers, however, appeared too stubborn to back down. His scowl deepened with each passing minute, as though he relished the confrontation. Yet Danielle's mind was set. She was no mere victim here. She was an attorney, a guardian of the law, and she planned to use every inch of her power to shine a light on Officer Bowers' misconduct. While Danielle waited, Bowers made a call of his own, stepping into a small break room that reeked of stale donuts and microwaved leftovers. The overhead lights buzzed incessantly. He tapped in a series of numbers on his cell phone, a personal contact, not an official line. After a few rings, a raspy voice answered on the other side. "It's me," he said curtly, pacing across the cracked linoleum floor. "We've got a situation." His contact, someone who had aided him in the past, responded in hushed tones. The conversation was cryptic, referencing old favors and the possibility of incriminating documents. Bowers' voice dripped with thinly veiled anxiety, a sharp contrast to the bravado he displayed outside. "She's a lawyer from the AG's office, apparently. Could be trouble. I need to make sure nothing surfaces." He paused, listening to the instructions. "Right. I'll keep her here for now. If you've got anything on her, let me know. I'll see if I can spin it. Otherwise, I'll bury her in enough paperwork that nobody'll bother to pry." After another pause, his face twisted. "Yeah, I know. I'll be careful." He ended the call and stood still for a moment, the tension crackling in the air. This might be bigger than he'd anticipated. In his mind, Danielle's credentials changed her from a random suspect into a threat to everything he'd built his carefully curated reputation as a tough, unstoppable officer, his network of favored prosecutors who turned a blind eye, and the hush-hush deals he cut to keep his record clean. He realized he needed a plan, a narrative to paint Danielle as uncooperative, dangerous, maybe even unscrupulous. If she was indeed rising in the Civil Rights Division, she'd have the power to open old files, maybe even that rumor from his Chicago days. He bit his lip, adrenaline spiking. He wouldn't let her ruin him, not without a fight. Under the buzzing fluorescent lights, Officer Martinez quietly slipped away from Bowers to check official records using the station's outdated desktop computer. The station's internal system connected to the Illinois database, though it wasn't as thorough as what the main headquarters might access. She typed Danielle Johnson into the system, double-checking the ID number from the license and any professional credentials linked to the name. Martinez's eyes widened when the search results confirmed Danielle's identity, Danielle A. Johnson, Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division, licensed with the Illinois State Bar, top graduate from Harvard Law School. There were mentions of her high-profile cases, including a recent investigation into police brutality that gained significant media traction in the Chicago Tribune. Martinez felt her heart sink. This was not the type of person you arrest on a whim. She printed out the summary of Danielle's record, the crisp pages trembling slightly in her hands as she approached Bowers. He stood near the coffee maker, jaw tense, eyes distant. Martinez cleared her throat. "Officer Bowers? We need to talk," she said, her voice low but urgent. He turned, annoyance etched into his features. "What is it?" Martinez handed him the printout. "She's who she says she is, and it looks like she's a rising star in the Civil Rights Division. She's got connections all the way up to the Attorney General. It's not looking good for us if we keep her here without a solid charge." Bowers snatched the papers, scanning them. His eyes flitted from line to line, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face before it hardened back into a scowl. "Well, what's done is done," he said, trying to maintain authority. "She was resisting. That's all I need to book her." "Derek," Martinez pressed, using his first name for emphasis, "we both know that's not going to fly. She'll have an entire team of lawyers knocking on our door by morning, demanding an explanation. This station isn't equipped to handle that kind of heat." He tossed the papers onto the nearby desk. "Don't you think I know that?" He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. "Look, we do things by the book, right? She resisted. I have probable cause. I'll fill out the report. If the bosses want her out, they can let her out. But until then, we hold her like any other suspect." Martinez met his gaze, her expression uncertain. "You sure about this?" Bowers squared his shoulders. "Dead sure. She's not walking out of here until I'm satisfied. If you don't like it, you can file a complaint. But if you do, remember who's got your back on the next shift when things get rough out there." Martinez's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't entirely convinced, but the unspoken code of the force weighed heavily on her. For now, she decided to wait, though a knot of dread formed in her stomach. One thing was clear: the night was about to get much more complicated. As dawn approached, a faint glow crept over the horizon, signaling the start of a new day. Danielle had barely slept. They'd kept her in the holding room without so much as an apology or an explanation of charges. Her mind whirled with the possibilities of what might happen next. She was determined to stand her ground, but fear had a way of creeping in during those solitary hours. She heard a polite knock on the metal door before it opened, revealing Officer Martinez. The officer slipped inside, a cautious expression on her face. She gently closed the door behind her. "Miss Johnson," Martinez began quietly, "I want to apologize for the way things have gone." Officer Bowers can be adamant. Danielle exhaled, studying Martinez's posture. She could sense genuine concern. "I appreciate that," she replied softly, "but I need to know what's happening. I have a right to my legal counsel, and I have colleagues who will be looking for me." Martinez nodded. "They already are. The phone's been ringing off the hook. Calls from the Attorney General's office, from your colleague Mark Orlov, from the Illinois State Bar, even the local ACLU branch." Martinez pressed her lips together. "Bowers is refusing to release you unless we follow certain procedures. He filed a report claiming you resisted a lawful search. He's using language that suggests you posed a threat." Danielle's stomach churned. She knew exactly how cops with an agenda could twist the narrative. "So what happens now?" "I'm going to do my best to expedite this," Martinez said. "Honestly, I believe you'll be out soon. But Bowers, he's doubling down. He's convinced if we let you go without processing, it'll raise suspicion, and his superiors might see him as weak or incompetent. He's covering himself. She hesitated, then added, I'm worried. If he drags his feet, or if he tries to push a false story, this could escalate. I'm prepared to fight back, Danielle responded, her voice steady. I won't let him bulldoze my rights. Martinez nodded again. I just wanted you to know there's at least one person here who sees your side. I can't override him, but I'm not going to lie for him either. She paused. If there's anything I can do, within reason, let me know. It wasn't the miracle Danielle had hoped for, but it was a glimmer of humanity in an otherwise hostile environment. Officer Martinez, at least, recognized that justice was not being served by blindly following Bauer's tactics. Danielle felt a cautious sense of gratitude, along with the renewed conviction that this battle was worth fighting. The sun was slowly rising outside, and with it, perhaps, a chance to reveal the truth. Back in Chicago, Mark Orloff was up before sunrise, making frantic calls from his living room. His coffee had gone cold on the table, untouched. He wore an old Harvard Law sweatshirt as he hunched over his laptop, scanning legal statutes and drafting motions to secure Danielle's release. Nearby, half a dozen thick case files lay scattered, references to prior incidents of police misconduct within the state. He spoke with the Attorney General, Lisa Patterson, whose calm voice belied her urgency. Mark, I've already contacted the Illinois State Police Director. He's going to personally look into this. But we need more details, like the specific charge. Bowers can't just hold her without a filed complaint. Mark rubbed his forehead. According to the station's front desk, he's claiming she resisted arrest during a traffic stop, which is ridiculous. Anyone who knows Danielle knows she wouldn't do that. The AG sighed. We'll expedite an investigation. But in the meantime, do what you can to keep pressure on them. If you can get that station's commanding officer on the phone, demand a timeline for her release. We can't let them bury her in paperwork or stall the process. I'm on it, Mark said. After hanging up, he dialed the desk number at that satellite station, fully prepared to push every button available. Eventually, Officer Martinez answered, her voice tense. Mark introduced himself, explaining the gravity of the situation. I'd like to speak with the officer in charge immediately, Mark demanded. Officer Bowers is unavailable at the moment, Martinez replied carefully. He's out dealing with some official matter. I'll pass on your message. Mark clenched his jaw. You tell him that if he does not provide a valid charge or release Miss Johnson will be filing a motion in court, and he'll be facing a civil rights lawsuit for unlawful arrest. We have the backing of the Illinois Attorney General. Understood. A pause. Then Martinez spoke softly. Understood. I'll pass that along. When Mark set the phone down, he felt a surge of both anger and resolve. This was more than personal. It was emblematic of a system that all too often disregarded proper procedure when dealing with black citizens. Danielle's position gave her a rare advantage. She had powerful allies, resources, and intimate knowledge of the law. But Mark couldn't shake the thought of countless others who did not. With renewed determination, he started drafting a press release. If the station continued to stonewall, the public would need to hear the truth. After dawn broke, the station buzzed with unfamiliar activity. Additional staff arrived, phone calls multiplied, and the tension thickened. Danielle sensed the shift from her holding room as voices rose and footsteps crisscrossed the corridor outside. Finally, mid-morning, the door swung open to reveal Officer Bowers, face set in a grim line. On your feet, he ordered. Danielle stood, steeling herself. Am I being released? Bowers let out a bitter laugh. Nice try. You've got some big friends calling in favors, but I'm not some rookie you can scare off. We're heading to the interrogation room. I need your statement. She followed him into the hallway, noticing that Officer Martinez stood a short distance away watching. Her presence was reassuring, though Danielle couldn't rely on her for direct intervention. They walked to a sterile, windowless room, equipped with a battered metal table and 2 chairs. A camera was mounted in the corner. Bowers took a seat opposite Danielle, flipping through a clipboard of paperwork. He pressed the record button on a small device. For the record, interview with suspect Danielle Johnson, conducted by Officer Derek Bowers at approximately 9:30 a.m. Miss Johnson, state your name and occupation for the record. Danielle folded her hands in front of her. Danielle A. Johnson, Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division, State of Illinois. Bowers jotted something on his notepad, ignoring the tension in the air. Why were you traveling on Highway 55 last night? I had business in Springfield reviewing legal cases. She provided the bare facts, nothing more. He pressed on. Why did you refuse my lawful request to search your vehicle? It wasn't lawful, she said evenly. You provided no probable cause. You asked me to step out of the car without any explanation and forcibly detained me when I questioned it. Bowers snorted. That's your version of events. The real story is you were evasive, refused to comply with an officer's orders, and actively resisted arrest when I tried to secure the scene. Danielle felt anger simmer in her chest. That's categorically untrue, he shrugged. Well, it's on the record now. He scribbled more notes, then ended the recording. We'll see what the district attorney thinks. He stood abruptly, gestures laced with hostility. In the meantime, you're not going anywhere. Danielle stayed in her seat, her voice calm but firm. You're making a grave mistake, Officer Bowers. There will be consequences for this misconduct. His jaw tightened. He pointed a finger at her. You threaten me again, and I'll tack on more charges. Try it. With that, he stormed out, leaving Danielle alone at the cold metal table. The camera's red light blinked ominously in the corner, a silent witness to the power struggle unfolding. Time blurred under the fluorescent hum. Danielle was escorted back to the holding room, feeling the stale chill of institutional walls pressing in on her. But she refused to give in to despair. She could sense that external forces were gathering on her behalf. The calls from the Attorney General's office, the repeated queries from the ACLU, and her own knowledge of the law would eventually corner Bowers into releasing her. After a couple of hours past time marked only by the ticking clock on the wall, Officer Martinez returned, carrying a paper cup of water and a sandwich wrapped in plastic. She handed them to Danielle with a quiet sympathy in her eyes. Thank you, Danielle said, letting out a breath she'd been holding. Any news? Martinez nodded. A lot of calls are coming in. They're urgent, demanding immediate action. Our station chief is on his way here. He'll likely arrive within the hour, and I expect he'll override Bowers. She paused, then added, I overheard that the state's attorney might also get involved, possibly coming down in person. Relief flickered in Danielle's chest. That's good to hear. Martinez hesitated, then lowered her voice. I want you to know that if you file a complaint or a lawsuit, whatever you do, I'll tell the truth about what happened. That small declaration of solidarity sparked gratitude in Danielle's weary heart. Thank you, she repeated. I truly appreciate that. I know it's not easy to speak up. Martinez's expression was resolute. I joined the force to serve and protect. This isn't right. I can't stand by and let him manipulate the situation. The moment held a quiet power. 2 women, one a black state lawyer unjustly detained, the other a Latina officer caught in a moral quandary, found common ground in the belief that justice was more than a slogan. It was a fragile but vital aspiration, worth defending even when it placed them on a collision course with entrenched power. The station chief, Captain Howard Goodwin, arrived at midday, a tall man in his late 50s with a salt and pepper mustache and the no-nonsense air of someone who had seen it all. He immediately summoned Officer Bowers and Martinez to his makeshift office, a cramped room crowded with filing cabinets and dusty plaques. The tension in the air was palpable. "What in God's name is going on here?" Goodwin demanded, tossing a manila file onto the desk. "I have the Attorney General breathing down my neck about an unlawful arrest of one of her staff." Bowers stiffened. "Sir, I acted on suspicion of contraband." She refused to search, resisted arrest. "Cut the nonsense," Goodwin barked, glaring at Bowers. "I've reviewed your report, and it's full of holes. No probable cause. No mention of a clear traffic violation. You're burying this department with an arrest that won't stand in court for 2 seconds. Bowers' face flushed with anger. "Sir, with all due respect, I've made arrests under similar circumstances plenty of times and—" "Plenty of times?" Goodwin's eyes narrowed. "You'd better hope none of those are questionable, or Internal Affairs will have a field day." He glanced at Martinez. "Officer, what's your assessment?" Martinez spoke carefully, aware of the minefield. "Captain, Miss." Johnson did not appear to resist. She merely asked for the reason behind the search. "I believe Officer Bowers overstepped standard procedure." Bowers shot Martinez a look of pure venom, but Goodwin held up a hand to silence him. "That's what I figured. Listen, Officer Bowers, we're releasing Miss Johnson now. She's free to go. I'll handle the fallout. But if I find out you fabricated evidence or lied in any part of your report, I promise you, I'll let Internal Affairs do their worst." Bowers gnashed his teeth, but he saw the writing on the wall. If he kept pushing, he might be fired on the spot. "Fine," he muttered, hands clenched at his sides. Goodwin turned to Martinez. "Get Miss Johnson out of that room. Apologize. And for God's sake, don't say another word that can incriminate this department any further." Then he looked back at Bowers. "We'll discuss your future here later. For now, stand down." Bowers said nothing, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. Martinez quickly left to fetch Danielle, relief washing over her as she realized the ordeal was finally coming to an end. Yet a small shiver of foreboding pricked her. Bowers was not the type to accept defeat graciously. Danielle was escorted into the hallway where she found Captain Goodwin waiting. He offered a curt nod, his gaze tinged with regret. "Miss Johnson, I apologize for the inconvenience and distress you've experienced." "You're free to go." Inconvenience. The word rang hollow after the humiliating hours she'd spent under unjust detention. But Danielle held her composure. She nodded. "I'd like my belongings now, including my car keys and my phone." Goodwin gestured to a small property tray at the front desk. Of course, Danielle picked up her phone, noticing dozens of missed calls and texts. She scrolled briefly messages from Mark, from the AG's office, from family members who'd heard the shocking news. Her cheeks burned with a mixture of relief and anger. She could imagine her mother's worried voice, her father's quiet rage. But she'd soon reassure them she was okay. As she turned to leave, Officer Bowers appeared at the end of the corridor, arms folded over his chest. Their eyes locked, a silent clash of wills. She could practically feel the hatred radiating from him. Before she could slip out the door, he stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You think you've won, Miss Johnson? You have no idea what you've started," he growled. "People in your position can fall from grace overnight." Danielle refused to be intimidated. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his glare with her own. "I don't fear the truth, officer, and I won't hesitate to expose corruption wherever I find it." His face twisted into a sneer. "We'll see. Just remember, you're not the only one with connections." She felt a spark of indignation. "Threatening me further only proves my point." Then she turned on her heel, pushing through the station door into the cool afternoon air. As she walked to her car, she took a moment to breathe, letting the fresh breeze wash over her. Every step felt surreal. She was free, but the imprint of the cuffs lingered like a bruise on her wrists. She resolved, then and there, to pursue justice not just for herself, but for anyone else who might have suffered under Bauer's brand of policing. Little did she know that the ripples of her ordeal would soon become a tidal wave, exposing a much bigger network of wrongdoing than anyone anticipated. Once safely in her car, Danielle drove straight to a nearby diner. She needed a calm, neutral space to collect her thoughts. The place was modest, with neon signs advertising pies and burgers, but it was bright and bustling, a sharp contrast to the suffocating gloom of the station. She parked, took a seat in a booth by the window, and ordered a coffee she barely sipped. Instead, she tapped furiously on her phone. First, she called Mark Orloff. "I'm out," she said when he answered. "They released me without charges, probably because of all the pressure from the AG and the media." "Thank God," Mark replied. She could hear the relief in his voice. "Are you all right?" "I will be," she answered. "But I'm not letting this slide. We need to file a formal complaint. Request body cam footage, everything." "This is bigger than me now." "Agreed," Mark said. "I'll coordinate with the AG's office and the ACLU. They're already preparing a statement. There's media interest too." Chicago Tribune reached out, wanting a comment. Danielle took a breath. "Let's do it. Let the public know what happened. Transparency is our greatest weapon here." After hanging up, she emailed notes on the incident to her state office account, describing each detail while it was fresh in her mind: the timeline, Bauer's threatening words, Officer Martinez's attempts to intervene. Next, she drafted an internal memo for the Civil Rights Division, requesting a formal inquiry into Officer Derek Bowers. She flagged his name for any prior misconduct complaints, especially from his days in the Chicago Police Department. She also called her father, Dr. Richard Johnson, a retired history professor who had always advocated for social justice. His voice trembled with concern, but also pride. "Danielle, you know we stand by you," he said. "Your mother's worried sick, but we've seen you fight bigger battles in court. This one might get ugly, Dad," she warned. Bowers threatened he had connections. "I don't know who he's working with, but I sense a network of corruption. Shine the light of truth," her father replied firmly. "That's all you can do." By the time she finished her calls and emails, the coffee in her cup had grown cold. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion pressing in, but a renewed sense of purpose propelled her. The next step was clear: gather all the evidence, line up witness statements, and prepare for a legal showdown. She had no illusions about how tough the path might be, but she also knew that the biggest triumphs emerged from relentless perseverance. The next morning, Danielle arrived at the Cook County State's Attorney's office in downtown Chicago, a place she knew intimately from her previous employment. The building's towering glass facade reflected the city skyline, a monument to law and order in the bustling metropolis. Mark met her in the lobby, looking slightly haggard from the round-the-clock effort he'd been putting in. "I've pulled some of Bauer's old files," Mark said as they walked to a conference room. "You're not going to like what we found." They settled into worn leather chairs around a long table stacked with folders. Mark slid one thick folder toward her. Inside were printouts of disciplinary hearings, complaints filed by citizens, and internal memos that had never seen the light of day. Turns out Bowers was flagged multiple times at the Chicago Police Department for excessive force and racial profiling, Mark explained. Most complaints were dismissed due to lack of evidence. But there's a pattern. Danielle flipped through page after page. Each complaint told a similar story: an unjust stop, aggressive tactics, a suspect, often black or Latino, left feeling threatened or injured. The official records noted that Bowers' arrests led to convictions in some cases, but the question loomed large. Had he manipulated or fabricated evidence to secure those convictions? Why was he never fully investigated? Danielle asked, her stomach twisting in disgust. Mark shrugged. Some of these memos mention he had a mentor high up in the department, a deputy chief, who apparently shielded him. When that deputy chief retired, Bowers transferred to the Illinois State Police, presumably to avoid further scrutiny. Mark grimaced. We suspect he might have a network of sympathetic folks covering for him, especially in smaller stations. Danielle leaned back, the weight of the revelations pressing down. This is systemic. If we prove Bowers engaged in misconduct, we might pull the thread that unravels multiple wrongful convictions. Mark nodded. Exactly. That's why we're going to push hard on an official investigation. The AG's office is on board. They want you to lead it if you're up for it. She felt her pulse race. Leading a high-profile case against a corrupt officer and potentially exposing a ring of misconduct, this was the kind of work she'd dedicated her career to. Yet the stakes were high, the threats from Bowers still fresh in her mind. She steeled herself. I'm in, she said resolutely. Then let's get to work, Mark replied with a faint grin, relief evident in his eyes. He spread out the files and laptops, creating a war room atmosphere. We'll need to interview past victims, gather evidence, and coordinate with internal affairs. This might take weeks, months even. Danielle nodded. Whatever it takes. Let's do it right. Over the next several weeks, Danielle and her team reached out to individuals who had filed complaints against Officer Bowers. Some were hesitant to speak, traumatized by their experiences or fearful of retaliating forces. Others were eager, seeing this as the first real chance to hold him accountable. They interviewed a man named Julian Briggs, who alleged Bowers planted a small bag of narcotics in his glove compartment during a stop on the South Side. I'd just finished a shift at work janitor at a local high school, Julian recounted, voice shaking. He pulled me over, said I was swerving. Next thing I know, he's rummaging through my car, and suddenly he's holding up a bag I swear I'd never seen in my life. Danielle listened patiently. Were there any witnesses? She asked. Julian shook his head. No, I was alone. It was late. I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. He exhaled, eyes clouding with frustration. I didn't stand a chance. Then there was Maria Alvarez, who described a traffic stop for a supposed broken taillight. Bowers shoved me against the hood, she recalled, tears in her eyes. He said I was resisting arrest, but I was just scared. I ended up with bruises and a charge that got dismissed later, but my baby girl watched the whole thing from the back seat. I've never gotten over that. Each story added a piece to the puzzle, a pattern of racially motivated stops, intimidation, fabricated charges, and subsequent cover-ups. Danielle took meticulous notes, cross-referencing each account with public records and Bowers' official reports. The discrepancies piled up, forming a damning mountain of evidence. Meanwhile, Mark liaised with the Illinois State Police Internal Affairs Division. Initially slow to respond, they became more cooperative as media outlets began sniffing around the story. The looming threat of public exposure often served as a catalyst for action in bureaucracies that preferred silence. The final piece fell into place when Danielle found an internal memo referencing Operation Shield, a rumored initiative in which certain officers bent the rules to achieve higher arrest quotas, supposedly with tacit approval from some superiors. Though the memo didn't name Bowers directly, the timeline and pattern aligned with his track record. As the scope of corruption became clearer, Danielle realized that this was not merely about her wrongful arrest. It was about systematically targeting communities of color for easy arrests, feeding them into a justice system that often presumed them guilty. The irony of her own position, a civil rights lawyer who had fallen victim to the very misconduct she fought, pressed heavily on her. But it also ignited her resolve. "This is bigger than we thought," Mark said one evening, as they pored over documents in an office lit only by a flickering fluorescent lamp. "We might bring down multiple officers, maybe even some higher-ups, if this investigation goes where I think it will." Danielle nodded, her gaze intense. "Then we owe it to all these victims to see it through, no matter how ugly it gets." She ran a hand over her face, exhaustion creeping into her bones. "We're forging ahead. Let the truth come out." Word of Danielle's investigation reached Bowers sooner than she expected. One cold morning, she emerged from her condo in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood and discovered a note tucked under her windshield wiper. "Back off, or else." The handwriting was scrawled and anonymous, but the message was clear. It wasn't just a note. She noticed fresh scratches on her car door, deliberate, jagged lines. Her chest tightened. She quickly scanned the street for any sign of a lurking presence, but saw only empty sidewalks and the usual morning traffic. She immediately called Mark, voice trembling. "I just got threatened," she told him, describing the note. "I'm sure it's Bowers or someone connected to him." Mark's response was swift and measured. "I'll contact the AG's office and the local precinct. We'll get you some protection. Don't drive that car until the cops have a chance to dust for prints." Despite her outward calm, her mind reeled with anger, fear, and determination. She refused to be cowed by intimidation tactics. But the reality sank in. This was a dangerous pursuit. She might be dealing with an entrenched culture that wouldn't hesitate to lash out. Within hours, detectives from the Chicago Police Department arrived, photographing the damage to her car and collecting the note. They assured her they would investigate, though their somber expressions revealed they expected little direct evidence to trace the threat back to Bowers. "You need to be careful," one detective advised. "Watch your surroundings. Document everything." That night, Danielle lay awake in bed, heart pounding at every distant siren or creak of the apartment. What if they come for me again? She thought of her parents, friends, and the weight of responsibility she carried for those who'd been wronged by Bowers. Resolutely, she reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to persist despite it. Fueled by the threat, Danielle and her team doubled down on their investigative efforts. The AG's office quietly provided additional support analysts, paralegals, and even a few specialized investigators with backgrounds in probing police corruption. Some of them had done groundbreaking work with the Department of Justice in other states, dismantling corrupt precincts. Piece by piece, they uncovered a small but powerful network of officers and bureaucrats who protected one another. It became clear that Bowers had allies in key positions who dismissed complaints or lost evidence that might incriminate him. They found paper trails leading to hush money or out-of-court settlements for victims who agreed to withdraw their complaints. The net was wide, capturing unassuming clerks who processed false reports and even lawyers who turned a blind eye to questionable evidence. Operation Shield, once just a rumor, seemed to be a real initiative. Under the guise of public safety, certain officers were tasked with increasing arrest numbers in high-crime neighborhoods, often targeting minorities for minor infractions or fabricated violations. Danielle's wrongful arrest was simply the tip of the iceberg, a direct encounter with a system too accustomed to abusing its power. The Illinois State Police Internal Affairs Unit, spurred by the mounting evidence, began interviewing current and former officers. Some, like Martinez, provided honest accounts. Others stonewalled or gave rehearsed denials. But the cracks grew. Higher-ups scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, quietly scapegoating lower-ranking individuals to save their own reputations. Amid the swirling tensions, local media outlets, especially the Chicago Tribune and WGN News, caught wind of the investigation. Stories began to break, mentioning an unnamed officer who had arrested a high-level state lawyer under false pretenses. Anonymous sources hinted at a broader conspiracy. The public reaction was immediate outrage, particularly in marginalized communities that had long complained of discriminatory policing. As the pressure mounted, Danielle felt an odd mix of satisfaction and dread. They were on the brink of a historic takedown, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. The next big development came when an internal affairs detective named Ronald Pierce reached out to Danielle. He requested a confidential meeting, hinting that he had explosive information on Bowers' activities. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in a suburb west of Chicago. Detective Pierce arrived in plainclothes, scanning the surroundings nervously before sliding into the booth across from Danielle. She could sense his unease, the fear of a man stepping outside the protective circle of the blue wall. "What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job, or worse," Pierce said, leaning in. "But I can't stay silent anymore." Danielle nodded, quietly encouraging him to proceed. "I've been looking into old files, stuff we never fully investigated," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bowers has been implicated in at least 3 incidents of planted evidence we suspect, but we lacked solid proof. In one case, there was a dashcam video, but it vanished from the evidence locker. That's not the only thing that's disappeared. Paperwork, witness statements gone." Her mind raced. "So there's a direct link between Bowers and missing evidence." Pierce swallowed. "Yes, and it goes higher than him. I have reason to believe a lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Division itself is part of this. He's been burying or destroying files to protect Bowers and a handful of other officers. We don't know how many more are involved, but it's big." A chill ran down Danielle's spine. "Do you have anything concrete?" Pierce glanced around, then slid a small USB drive across the table. "I managed to recover some fragments of deleted videos and documents. It might not be everything, but it shows a pattern. Combined with the testimonies you've gathered, it could blow this case wide open." Danielle took the drive, her hand trembling with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Detective Pierce, thank you. This is exactly the kind of proof we need." He nodded gravely. "Just be careful. The more people see you getting close to the truth, the more desperate they'll become." In that moment, Danielle realized they were no longer merely investigating misconduct. They were poised to expose a malignant cancer within the police system. She left the cafe with a new burden of responsibility, the knowledge that if they failed to bring this to light properly, it could be hidden again. Not this time, she vowed. Armed with Pierce's evidence and corroborating witness statements, Danielle and her team prepared formal charges against Bowers and several co-conspirators. The AG's office coordinated with the U.S. Attorney to explore possible federal civil rights violations. Tensions were at a boiling point. One crisp morning, the official warrants were signed. Illinois State Police, under Captain Goodwin's orders, arrested Bowers at his home. Meanwhile, other officers named in the conspiracy found themselves cuffed and brought in. The news cameras captured every moment, broadcasting it across the state, the once untouchable cop, now facing the consequences of his actions. Danielle watched the coverage from her office, a sense of vindication washing over her. She was on a conference call with Mark, the AG, and the federal prosecutors, discussing the next steps. That's when her phone buzzed, showing an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, she answered. A voice she recognized immediately seethed on the other end. "You think you've beaten me?" Bowers. Her heart thumped as she realized he must have used his one phone call from lockup. This is far from over, Johnson. I have friends on the outside. You'll regret crossing me, Danielle exhaled, a mixture of anger and steadiness in her voice. Your threats mean nothing now. It's done, Bowers. You're facing real charges, federal charges. You can't intimidate your way out. A bitter laugh crackled through the phone. We'll see if your precious system protects you when the time comes. He hung up, leaving Danielle in momentary shock. But as she looked at the assembled team on her video call, people determined to uphold justice, she felt a surge of confidence. This was no longer a one-woman battle. The entire machinery of the state and federal justice system had turned against him. His last-ditch threats were a desperate attempt to cling to control. Within hours, Bowers found himself formally charged with multiple counts: violation of civil rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Preliminary hearings painted a grim picture for his defense, as witness after witness came forward, bolstered by actual video fragments from the USB drive Pierce had provided. The scandal shook the Illinois State Police to its core, prompting internal reforms and calls for greater oversight. As for Danielle, she could finally see the promise of real change unfolding. In the months that followed, the legal process marched forward. Bowers' allies either distanced themselves or, in some cases, flipped, turning state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Investigative reporters uncovered a larger tapestry of systemic failures, intensifying public scrutiny. Ultimately, Bowers' trial arrived. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, curious citizens. Danielle attended every session, though the prosecutors handling the criminal case weren't from her office. Still, she provided testimony about her own wrongful arrest. She described the night he violated her rights, the fear she felt, and the subsequent intimidation. The defense tried to discredit her by implying she sought vengeance, but her calm, factual testimony spoke volumes. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than a day. Bowers was found guilty on multiple counts. The judge sentenced him to a considerable prison term, stating that any officer who weaponized the law to harm citizens deserved a harsh penalty. Hard karma, indeed. Danielle watched as Bowers was led away in handcuffs, the very symbol of authority stripped from him. She couldn't say she felt joy. There was too much tragedy in the story, too many victims who still bore emotional scars, but there was relief. Justice, though delayed, had finally been served. With Bowers' conviction, a wave of internal reforms swept through the Illinois State Police. A new task force was created to review questionable arrests, leading to dozens of overturned convictions. The Chicago Tribune featured Danielle's role prominently, commending her bravery and the painstaking efforts of the Civil Rights Division. One crisp morning, she stood on the steps of the Cook County Courthouse, addressing a group of community leaders and reporters. "This case should remind us that no one is above the law," she said, voice clear against the brisk air. "Our fight against corruption and racism within the system is far from over, but this victory shows what we can achieve when we stand together." A sense of closure lingered, but Danielle knew the work of dismantling systemic racism was ongoing. Still, she savored the moment, a moment that validated every sleepless night, every threat she endured, and every tear shed by those whose voices had gone unheard for too long. This journey of justice and redemption reveals how one woman's wrongful arrest became the spark that illuminated a hidden network of corruption. Through Danielle Johnson's unwavering resolve, she exposed a deeply entrenched cycle of racism and misconduct, ultimately pushing a corrupt officer behind bars. Yet her story also reminds us that accountability is an ongoing endeavor. There are countless victims still waiting for someone to stand up on their behalf. Change may be slow, but every voice raised against injustice makes a difference. If this story moved you or shed new light on the power of perseverance, please consider showing your support. Like this video, share it with friends who value the fight for justice, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that honor courage in the face of adversity. Together, we can continue to advocate for a more equitable world, one voice, one action, and one victory at a time.